Hello. Yes. A ship is hailing us. Well, that doesn't happen very often. Yeah. Okay. Put him on the main viewer. This is Chris Kaler of the USS Pathway to Space. To whom am I speaking?
This is Eric Alston of the HMS Cousteau.
And this is Zach Donahue, first officer.
Ah, nice to meet you. What's the nature of your emergency? I got your hail.
Oh, we're having some trouble with our defense system, and we were hoping to get it looked at before we go any further.
Oh, well, that sounds like something we can help you with here on the Pathway. We're a little short-staffed, but yeah, come on board. Stand by to be transported.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead and after they get here, send them to the bridge, please. Thanks. All right, thank you. Wow, guests on the USS Pathway. I hope they can find their way to the bridge. Oh, wow. Wow, welcome. How are you guys?
Chris, thank you so much. Oh, man.
Yeah, Captain. I'm Captain.
Captain.
Yeah, but you
first
call me
officer
Chris.
Zach. Yeah.
Yeah. Captain Kaler.
From the, what was it?
HMS Cousteau.
Oh, Cousteau. Have a seat. Let's see, why don't you sit here, Zach and Eric? Yeah,
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, this is quite a bit cozy in here. So good to see you all. You've had a long journey. How about something to drink? Would you like something cool?
Would love some space water. Yeah.
Cool
Cool.
water?
Cool.
Yeah, cool space water.
Can I have two cool space waters, please? Oh, fantastic. Here we go. Now these are standard issue on the ship here.
Do I need to keep my hand over it?
No. Make sure you show the face. That's me on there. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're having some issues with your ship.
Yeah, some issues with the defense system in particular. We were hoping to get some of your engineers to look at that.
Now, are you using the Atari 2600 or are you using the Commodore 64?
The Atari 2600.
Just like that one right there.
Identical.
Well, maybe we can do a little training for you. We'll get them fixed. Hold on, let me. Hey, yeah, can you guys send some people over to the HMS Cousteau? I know we only have, it's just you and me on the ship at the moment. Yeah, can you go over there and fix their Atari? Let me know what's wrong. Okay, thanks. Bye. Yeah, they'll go over there. So yeah, I'm actually. What are you guys doing? What are you out here doing?
Oh, we're on our way to a governance conference.
Yeah.
We're actually presenting on a historical lens on governance and how we got to where we're actually traveling in spaceships in outer space.
Wow, that's fantastic. You know, I'm on a mission myself to. I'm headed to Starbase 420. 420, I'm picking up my crew. We're going on a journey, a mission of discovery and education about people finding their pathway to space. It's going to be great.
That sounds fantastic.
Because this ship can hold like 60 people. I don't know if you noticed how big it was when you were outside.
Yeah.
Expansive, yeah.
And by the way, my crew quarters, my captain's quarters, I have a fireplace.
That comes in handy. It's pretty cold out here.
Well, no, it's just ambiance.
Oh, okay.
You know.
Yeah.
It's good for the
Set the mood.
psychology. I hope to show my crew all of that, impress them. But anyway, I don't have them here yet. But you know, we're doing all kinds of educational aspects on this mission, and if you've got a minute, it might take a while for us to get your Atari working. Do you mind like maybe practicing? We could record your space governance lecture.
What do you think, Eric? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be great practice. We could use the practice actually.
All right. Well, I love that. I can then show my crew later, and then maybe we'll call you on the subspace channels and get you come back here someday and talk to them.
Oh, yeah. Would love to meet him.
All right. Well, let me pull it up. I think I have to call. Hello? Oh yeah, I think she's still over on your ship. Okay. I'll just. We've got your slides. They just came through the interwebs. So let me pull those up.
Perfect.
Okay. Oh, that looks like you guys.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's us.
Okay, fantastic. You know, we have some pretty cool technology in here, but I can't find it. I have a remote for how those things move. Careful.
Oh.
No liability insurance on the ship. Okay, so yeah, we've got your slides up, and I'm really looking forward to this. I hope I don't get any interruptions while I'm sitting here. So, do you all want to get started?
Absolutely.
All right.
Let's dive in.
All right, this is going to be great. I can't wait. I was going to do nothing today. So,
Well, prepare to learn, Chris. Captain.
okay. Well, you want to get started? We got the cameras rolling, I think.
Okay.
Excellent.
Should we get
Yeah,
started?
let's do this. Space governance.
Yeah.
Zach, do you want to take us away?
Yeah, like why does this matter? Like, why does it matter right now?
Oh, hold on a second. God, I can't believe this. I already got my phone ringing. Hello? You know, okay, you figured out the Atari issue. How long is it going to take? 60, about 60 minutes? 58 minutes? Okay. Fantastic. Well, what else is going on? Oh, well, that's not good. We can't have a... Well, we need to address that. Okay, I better take care of it. I'll come on down. Thanks. Bye. Turns out we're having our own little issue. It's okay, you're safe. Environmental systems are kind of fluctuating. It might be that we have too many people on board and we didn't calibrate that. So it might get a little hot in here. If you need any more drinks, just ring this bell right here. Actually, there's your bell.
I've got one right here, right? Does this work?
Yeah, just if you need more drinks, let me know and I will make sure we get them in the replicator. But you're recording. If you could just start over again, and I'll be back towards the end, hopefully, and catch the rest of it.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right,
Thank
guys,
you.
Thank you
Happy to
so
do it.
much.
Oh, happy to do it.
And she's
Yeah.
got your Atari almost done. It'll take about 57 minutes. Or so.
Appreciate it.
Excellent.
Get
We
us back on
appreciate
the road.
the assistance.
All right, enjoy.
Thank you.
What a nice guy.
Yeah, no. We need our defense system working, given some of the areas we're traveling through.
Yeah. We should update our Atari. All right, Eric, let's talk about space governance, why it's important. So let's motivate it right now, right? So in orbit, we've got about 5,000 active satellites, exponential growth in the number of satellites. Most of them, let's say like 3,000 are in the United States. Most of those are commercial satellites. We've got thousands of pieces of orbital debris. We've got countries testing anti-satellite missiles in space, creating more orbital debris. We've got other countries like the United States that have recently said, we need to have a moratorium, a ban on these kind of things. We've got interest in asteroid mining. A couple of years down the road, we're gonna set up a lunar base, maybe go to Mars. Now is the time to really talk about space governance and what that means. So what does that mean, Aaron?
Excellent. So today, governance. That's the theme, but may not come as a shock to anyone, but outer space is not the first thing we have governed as human beings. Not even close. And so to understand current and potential future issues in space governance, you've got to understand what governance is generally. So today's learning objectives are, what is governance? What are the types of governance? What sources of governance exist? What are the terrestrial analogs that'll teach us the most about where space governance is headed and create the foundation for space governance as it exists already? And finally, we're going to talk through some emerging space governance issues to give everyone a flavor of what we're talking about when we say space governance.
All right, so what is it?
And so, let's start with a clean definition. The governance, it is rule-based ordering of people and natural resources. And so, any context, you've got people and you've got natural resources being used to pursue a shared objective. That means you need rules governing who does what, who has a right to the benefits of a collective enterprise. Those are just a few examples of the types of questions that governance tackles. Now, I'm actually an author of a textbook surrounding some of the biggest tools in governance, which are institutions and organizations. Alongside norms and culture, institutions and organizations provide the backbone of the rule-based ordering of people and natural resources that is simply ubiquitous in human activity above a certain scale. And so this ship has its own unique culture. Zach and I found out about that as we walked on, and there's certainly norms governing our behavior, which is, how do we greet people? How should we behave in a certain context? Should we say thanks when Chris hands us a mug? Those are the softer mechanisms that provide governance in human societies. Today's talk will be a little bit thin on those aspects of governance because they're very hard to compare between contexts, and they're very hard to identify for people not present in a particular context. And so our focus is mainly on institutions and the groups of people, the formally constituted groups of people, organizations that create those institutions. And so an institution is any formal policy defined by an organization that its members are subject to, or other people in the ambit of the organization are subject to. We'll give you some tangible examples of what is necessarily an abstruse concept at this stage. But an institution might be a policy surrounding behavior in a workplace. It's all the laws of societies out there. It's rules of religious organizations for members of those organizations. You name the organization, it has policies, that's an institution. Are all organizations created equal, though? Not even close. Public organizations are those traditionally associated with the government. Private organizations, think nonprofits, think religious bodies, and think the profit maximizing firm. These are all classic types of private organizations within a particular country. But on top of that, we've got international organizations like the United Nations, as well as national organizations like governments or other private organizations organized at the national level. Finally, a major distinction between types of organizations surrounds their motives for organizing in the first place. And one of the big dichotomies we explore in this course in terms of its implications for outer space are profit maximizing versus philanthropic organizations. And finally, as an example, to step you through the complex way in which rules provide governance in human societies, let's talk about anti-littering laws. And I'll take a strong stance. They're a bit problematic.
Why is that?
Well, this is actually taken back on the earth in Georgia, Walker County, Georgia, of all places. And if you're thinking that sounds like it's in the middle of nowhere, you're absolutely right. There's very little there other than beautiful countryside, which I happened to drive through to take this photo. But I'm talking about littering laws. And I want to emphasize one thing in particular about littering on this sign. It says two things. Littering is unlawful and littering is awful. That's actually important for understanding the distinction in how rules, social rules, govern human behavior.
What are you getting at here? Why?
So I'm in the middle of nowhere in Georgia.
Yeah.
Not a police officer in sight, let alone another human being. Is it the enforcement probability of a police officer that makes me unlikely to litter? They're nowhere around. What are the chances that if I want to throw something out the window, that a police officer will be present? And guess what? If I happen to see a police officer, I wait 5 minutes and I'm guaranteed not going to see another one for an hour. So is it the fact that littering is unlawful that restrains me from engaging in that undesirable behavior? Or is it the fact that most human beings, myself included, think littering is awful? That is a normative judgment. So we have norms about how we should behave. Those are a huge input to the laws, aka the institutions we see in a particular society. And so one of the big questions for governance is, when can law successfully shape behavior? Or in contrast, when is law more likely to reflect underlying normative preferences for that same behavior? And so that's the distinction between a behavior being considered awful and a behavior being institutionalized as unlawful.
Before we go on, Erik, could you help me understand? We just have a lot of definitions here of governance, institutions, organizations. We take this spaceship, for example. Should I think of that spaceship as an institution or as an organization that the captain makes the rules on? Could you help clarify that for me?
And so I would consider the spaceship at a minimum a social group of individuals, but chances are they're bound together by some type of policy or contracts with one another. That creates a nexus of organized human behavior, which creates an organization. An organization then becomes a locus for enforcement of those institutions articulated by the organization itself. And so as captain of this ship, Chris can dictate policy that other members of the ship are subject to during their time on board, and chances are in other locations as well. And so an organization articulates institutions to govern the behavior of its members. But what are these institutions good for? Well, what makes people willing to coordinate at scale and personal cost with those they don't know well? And so Zach and I are based in Colorado when we're not off, traveling the galaxy. But one of the big developments in Colorado in its early phases, before it was even a state, was mining. Digging tunnels into the mountains that look like that, what's up on the screen. Scaffolding, many, many levels, involving the work of hundreds of people working together, pursuing a common enterprise. But what makes people willing to work in costly environments, in risky environments like the ones shown, without knowing the other people they're working with that well? It's the rules governing their behavior in those contexts. They're confident that they will be paid according to the terms they agreed to. If they have a right to the minerals that they're excavating from the mountain, they're confident that others will honor those rights. The development of risky frontiers relies on voluntary human coordination, which makes governance emergent. So our contention is, in outer space, like in many, many terrestrial contexts, organized governance is inevitable. When isn't this organized governance necessary? Some of you may have been thinking about the family unit, a close-knit group of friends going camping. Does governance not occur there? False. There's governance there, but it tends to occur through personal bonds and knowledge of one another, and knowledge of one another's preferences for each other's behavior. But once you scale above a certain level, you've hit an interesting constant called Dunbar's number, which is the maximum number of people that any individual can know well enough to know all of their preferences for others' behavior. Most human groups, most modern organizations, whether it be NASA, whether it be SpaceX, you name the large organization pursuing objectives in outer space, they have far more individuals working for them than everyone can know. And so you tend to see the emergence of institutionalized governance, organized governance, in context when you exceed Dunbar's number, which ranges from 150 to 275, depending on fancy scientific estimates of that amount. But why is this stuff hard? Why do you hear discussions of we need governance? Good governance matters. Good governance is hard to get.
Yeah, I was going to say, we've been putting artificial satellites into space since 1957. Don't we have all of the governance mechanisms that we need already?
Well, as more and more people use a resource, the likelihood of conflict increases. Similar to those mining contexts, the first individuals along the frontier, they weren't that worried about the rules governing other people's behavior. But when there were thousands of other miners seeking valuable minerals in the same foothills as them, well then suddenly the rules governing one another's behavior became really important. So as more and more individuals and organizations pursue their own objectives in outer space, the need for governance will only increase. But there's also this kind of rosy view of governance, which is everyone wants governance. Everyone wants good governance. Why is this stuff hard? Well, let's think about the context in which it makes sense to articulate rules for an organization, because guess what? It's costly to do so. Folks like Captain Chris, they spend their time exploring deep scientific questions or deep navigational questions at the helm of the ship, Dealing with the rules isn't fun, it's costly, but most problematic, it implicates the interests of those who don't agree with those who are governing. So back to the littering example very briefly. If 100% of people believed that littering was terrible, so they had that norm against littering, not worth doing it because of the costs, would we even see the appearance of anti-littering laws? And if everyone wanted to work at every moment in their job, would we need timesheets? Would we need costly monitoring of employees' effort? My contention is no. And so paradoxically, it's the people who don't agree with policy who are a central consideration to its definition and enforcement. And so my contention is that governance is costly but necessary because of the inevitability of costs or harms that our actions around one another create to one another's objectives. But let's talk about a little bit more background surrounding how we govern ourselves in environments, including outer space, like the graphic seen there.
Okay. So when I think about space, there's like a lot of different resources we could be talking about here, right? We could be talking about orbital slots. We could be talking about minerals on asteroids. We could be talking about scientific discovery and knowledge. So as my background in economics, I sometimes conceptualize these things, Eric, as thinking about resources along two dimensions. One dimension would be is excludability. How easy is it to exclude others from accessing that resource? Are there laws or rules in place that allow me, that prevent others from, say, using my mine if I'm in Colorado? Is it easy to do that? Is it low enforcement? Or is it nearly impossible? And the second thing would be rivalry. So what is rivalry? Rivalry would be, if I'm going to use a resource, does it diminish the ability of others to use the resource as well? Right? Or so if we develop scientific knowledge, you can think about that. I can share that knowledge with you and it's not rivalrous. And so other resources are, right? So if we want to put a lunar base at the south pole of the moon, then there's going to be less space there available for others to do the same thing. It's a scarce resource. It's rival. So why does this matter? It matters because a lot of the problems that we have and the need for governance is going to derive from the fact that it's difficult to exclude others from accessing the resource, or the things that we want to accomplish are perhaps non-rivalrous, and we want to come together to create something great, to expand our scientific knowledge. So sometimes I like to use this 2x2 matrix here for thinking about resources, right? So if we had laws that said that if you land on an asteroid and you want to mine the materials of that asteroid, well, you could consider that a private property and you could enforce that property right, and therefore we could call that excludable. And of course, if you extract minerals from that asteroid, well, that's rivalrous because there's less there. So we call that like maybe a private good. But other things like, say, satellite services, right, that are provided, here on Earth, right, you can access those internet services, the remote sensing services, unless you pay for them. Okay, so it's somewhat excludable. And if you do pay for them, then you have access to them. We call it maybe a club good, right? And then there's also like public goods, is what we call them in economics, the kind of things where, okay, is it non-excludable? If I publish that scientific research and it's known how to do that, well, then everyone gets to share in that, and it's non-rivalrous, and that's great. But those are a lot of things that sometimes organizations do together, either with governments or industries, to create that what we call public good. And then there's this thing where I think we'll focus on a lot today with thinking about common pool resources, those kind of resources that if we use them, they're rivalrous, it diminishes the ability for others to use them, but it's difficult or perhaps even illegal to exclude others from accessing them. So if we look at this graphic here, we can see that I've got, we're looking at low Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit, and we can see that there's lots of satellites, which are represented in orange, and then there's lots of orbital debris, which is represented, I think, in that pink color. But what we see here is a resource that it's difficult or illegal for us to exclude others, or we've agreed that anyone can access it. Let's put it that way. But using those resources, that low Earth orbit, it's not infinite. There's a finite number of it, amount of it. So there's congestion there. And so how do we come together to create good governance so that we can use, right, this resource of, say, low Earth orbit in productive ways without destroying the ability for others to use that resource as well? And so that's one way to kind of frame and conceptualize this. It's like there are benefits to using these resources, but we might be causing harm to the entire, say, space industry or to others by doing that. So what kind of rules do we need that will create the best outcomes? And is that possible to do? So what institutions do we need? What might those organizations look like?
As a quick question to make sure I'm tracking you. So are you saying that the nature of the good, in terms of it being rivalrous or non-rivalrous or excludable or non-excludable, that an organization is pursuing, that'll determine the governance challenges as well as the optimal organizational structure for pursuing that good in its own right?
What's good for the individual, or for, say, a country, or say a private satellite operator, might not be in the interest of, say, humankind. So sometimes governance is going to be about looking for that best outcome that's good for society, and sometimes that's going to be balanced against the cost of creating that organization, or it might be very challenging to do. We're going to talk about some of those challenges. So if we look here, what organizations are there? And Eric, would you agree that the United Nations is an organization?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is an organization, and in space policy, we see that the United Nations has a big role in thinking about what type of governance is possible, because we're talking about a global commons often. We're talking about anyone can access it. And as a matter of fact, if we think about the Outer Space Treaty, right, which I've got it all, the whole thing outlined here, or written out. The longer term for the Outer Space Treaty is the principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and the use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, right? Why? The reason that's important is because you can think of the Outer Space Treaty, which would you call that an institution?
Yep.
Okay.
An institution that emanates from the group of countries that signed on to the treaties itself, which can be thought of as an organization in its own right.
So about 104 countries have signed the Outer Space Treaty. And I want to focus here, it's on principles. They're kind of like high-level agreements that on principle that we should care about. And there's only 17 articles. It's pretty short as far as treaties go. And if you think about, like, say, Article 1, it says that the exploration and use of outer space is in the province of all mankind. So that's one of the principles there, right? So when we think about excludability, who can use space and who can't, well, the Outer Space Treaty is saying all mankind has access to these celestial bodies. And so that's important. So when we think about, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean for states? Does that mean for private actors like industry? Do they have access to it too? Those are some of the tensions that we would think about that have come up since 1967 when the Outer Space Treaty was ratified. Or if you think of Article 2, outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty. Okay, well, what does that mean? Appropriation. Can we put a base on the moon? We can't claim it as our own, but can we extract resources from it? Do those resources belong to the country that extracts them? Or do they belong, or the scientific knowledge that's developed from that? Or is it all of mankind? Do we need to share that? Those are some of the governance issues that are currently being debated. And then besides just treaties within this UN organization, we also have committees, say, on the peaceful uses of outer space, and those committees set up things like guidelines for long-term sustainability. And I'm going to have more to say about that later.
Excellent. And so just to kind of review in this governance portion, the UN, that's an international organization. NASA, that's a national public organization in the United States pursuing the United States government's outer space objectives. Finally, companies like Blue Origin or SpaceX, those are private organizations pursuing profit in the context of outer space. They're based in the United States, but many people would argue that their actions have greater than national implications, especially with the Starlink satellites going across the sky in increasing volume and intensity. And so this has just been kind of a crash course in, hey, these are the modes of governance. Institutions in particular are rules, aka formal policies that emanate from the different organizations that provide governance writ large. But let's talk about Antarctica.
Why?
It's a whole lot like space, actually. It's remote, really hard to get to. Once you're there, it's very hard to help you from the rest of the world. So you need to be pretty darn self-sufficient once you get to Antarctica. But guess what? There's hugely valuable natural resources contained in Antarctica. There's hugely valuable scientific knowledge buried in different corners of Antarctica or deep under the ice in the ocean that's below it. And so there are many reasons that different nations pursue Antarctica as an objective and have been at this point for decades. That map looks like a nightmare to me. Why? Because those are the territorial sovereignty claims from 7 different nations. So boom, you have different nations exploring Antarctica and saying, therefore we have a claim to this continent in this area in particular. And some of them are overlapping. If you see the 2 yellow lines up there and the 2 blue lines, those are competing claims between nations saying, actually, that's our territory. Historically, that doesn't go well when 2 nations say, actually, that's our territory. It tends to end in violent conflict. So one of the most important reasons for governance is that it avoids more costly conflict between participants in a context that both think they have a right to do something. In this case, they're claiming we have territorially sovereign rights over this land. Except there's overlap. So the United States enters the stage and says, hey, we would prefer violent conflict not occur in this area. And it's important to understand this is in the context of the Cold War, which could have turned hot at many different flashpoint moments in that particular history. And so the parties, the original parties, those with a presence on the Antarctic continent, sat down in 1959 in a context of scientific collaboration surrounding what was called the International Geophysical Year, where scientists put aside national geopolitical concerns for a moment and collaborated on pursuit of scientific objectives. And so one of the interesting points of this history, the development of the Antarctic Treaty System, the ATS as it's listed there on the slide, is scientific collaboration proved to be the foundation for successful international governance. And I say successful because it didn't result in parties fighting one another violently over their territorial claims like many nations have been doing since time immemorial. So vis-a-vis avoiding the hard question of let's fight to determine who owns this land, the parties agreed to put aside their territorial claims and agreed to pursue the continent freely for scientific purposes. So as a result, Antarctica was demilitarized and denuclearized, and now there are 54 parties from every inhabited continent that are members of the Antarctic Treaty System. So again, this avoided the thorny issue of sovereign claims to the territory made by the 7 countries shown on the map there. So Antarctica's governance, though, it's remote, it's hard to get to, it's hard to enforce your rules there, actually tells us a lot about the development of space, in part because many of those same nations were pursuing outer space objectives at the same time. And that's an image showing the Sputnik 1 satellite, which was occurring around the same time as the development of the Antarctic Treaty System. So this led to the development of a means for multiple nations to engage in scientific activities on a continent where no state exercised uncontested control. Rather than continent, think about a place where no state exercises uncontested control. Let's call that outer space. Similarly, This led to the development of a principle called free overflight, the ability to traverse space over a foreign nation for any non-lethal purpose, free from fear of attack. So the development of Antarctica created an international body of law that is exactly why we have satellites where they are today. They can freely pass over other countries without violating their territorially sovereign claims. So the pursuit of our outer space ambitions in this time period led to the definition of terrestrial precedent and vice versa. So a theme that comes out of the history of governance and the history of outer space governance is that our terrestrial objectives and governance processes are deeply bound up in the outer space governance processes that we see in practice. What's one tangible example of this? Well, the 17 articles of the Outer Space Treaty closely resemble the original 14 articles of the Antarctic Treaty. And so a general lesson surrounding governance is we develop institutions to resolve social problems in one context, and then we tend to port those solutions to a completely different governance context to the extent they work.
Okay, well, let's think about that. So if we've got, if we're interested in asteroid mining, right, where there's some valuable rare minerals there on mines, what kind of governance might we see there? So when we think about this, a lot of people think about seabed mining. Okay, like on the seabed floor, you have rare, valuable minerals that are costly to access, but increasingly the technology is allowing us to do that. But these are international waters. So what can we do, or might we see society do to manage and govern who has access to these common resources, and what are the rules that we're going to use to do that? So that has strong analogies between the deep seabed, difficult to access, international waters, and potentially asteroids. So what might that look like? So if we go on to the next slide, we can see that, again, this is international waters. Nested within the United Nations is an organization called the International Seabed Authority, right? And the governance rules are still evolving in here. But why is this important? A lot of people have joined the International Seabed Authority, a lot of countries, that is. And it matters because, one, the minerals are valuable, but also there's environmental effects of going down there, of causing damages and potential costs to the marine environment. And as a norm, as an ethic, society seems to want to avoid those bad harms. So the International Seabed Authority is an organization that has rules permitting whom can access, right, these minerals, and have permits for a delineated amount of time, called a property right if you want. And how the interesting controversial part of this right now is how are those resources shared? So one of the values that are articulated in the International Seabed Authority is this idea of the common heritage of mankind principle. You see this same principle in something called, what's oftentimes called the Moon Agreement or the Moon Treaty. Now, we don't talk about that a lot because there's not many signatories to the Moon Treaty, because the implication of the common heritage of mankind principle is that the economic value and those benefits should be equitably shared across, say, mankind, right? That's the principle. And so some countries and some organizations favor this, others don't. Currently, the United States isn't on board with the International Seabed Authority. It prefers bilateral agreements for accessing this. And so what type of governance we might see for seabed mining or with asteroid mining is unclear, but those are some of the tensions that currently exist and are being explored with different types of institutions and governance structures.
And it's likely that both the institutions that emanate from the International Seabed Authority, as well as the governance challenges, or tensions as Zach just called them, will likely be present in the context of asteroid mining as well. And so where do we look for lessons as to how that is likely to proceed, including some of the obstacles along the way? We suggest looking at deep sea mining and its history and ongoing development as a source for governance insights in the context of asteroid mining in particular. But let's talk a little bit about some current issues in space governance. We've got discussion of Mars colonization. This is actually an image taken from NASA's website showing how they think early colonization on Mars might look like. Elon Musk with SpaceX has also discussed at length the possibility of colonizing Mars, although his perspectives vary slightly from those of the US government in particular. Understanding the organization in question will tell you a lot about their incentives, as well as their perspectives about future governance. While Elon Musk thinks Mars may be self-governing and a sovereign entity in the future, it is likely that the US government does not share his perspective on that question. But Mars colonization, what good is it? Why are we even talking about it? Well, in an initial sense, we're trying to get an understanding if Mars can even sustain humans in the first instance. So that's our animating purpose. That's what's driving our incentives to get there, in addition to scientific discovery writ large. But a primary question from getting to Mars is, can it even sustain humans? Because otherwise, colonization is just the stuff of science fiction. But depending on how climate change occurs, it may be that we eventually need another planet. And so some of the reasons listed surround, can we survive as a species on Mars if this planet either becomes uninhabitable or if we just end up with too many people here? More generally, this is seen as part of our development as a species. Space is the final frontier, our pursuit of it is part of our intrinsic development. Similarly, it's anticipated that we'll learn how to solve many terrestrial problems through the development of space technologies, including those used in extremely hostile and remote environments like Mars. And there's always geopolitical ambitions tied up in this when it's public organizations pursuing it. So if the United States makes no move towards Mars, is there a future world in which China colonizes Mars and that operates to our detriment because we did nothing on that front? And so geopolitical ambitions are certainly tied up in this. Further down the road, do terrestrial laws even apply to Mars colonists? Elon Musk thinks they shouldn't. What about sovereignty? Should the Mars colony be sovereign? Do they deserve their own human rights as articulated by a Martian government organization and all the institutions that it articulates to provide governance? But let's talk about something a little closer to home. Unfortunately, rocket launches, getting to space, let alone acting in space in general, is one of the most risky activities known to man. That makes, for those who engage in the funding of these activities, that makes insurance very important. And therefore, insurance companies themselves provide governance for outer space activities. Just as insurance companies determine today who can drive on the roads in the United States, they govern individual drivers through their policy costs, as well as through their choice of whether to offer a policy to a particular driver at all. And this is because our private choices about risk have deep social implications. And some of the ways in which we govern our private choices about risk surround the ability to obtain insurance for the instantiation of those risks. So insurance can itself provide regulation through its policy's terms, conditions, and costs. Interestingly, though, this can work where national and international governance cannot. There are challenges to national governance. Think about special interest groups and lobbying and the influence that they have over national politics. Think about many people's frustration with the UN Security Council and why it can't condemn acts of war. These are challenges associated with public national and public international governance. Insurance companies, although by no means perfect, don't suffer from some of those problems. And so one of the ways of understanding governance is exploring the ways in which different organizations have advantages and disadvantages when it comes to providing governance for those subject to their authority. And as I noted, in the case of driving, in order to operate your own motor vehicle, you have to have insurance. And so these different forms of governance frequently overlap and intertwine with one another. In this case, insurers can be given the power to regulate at the invitation of the state by setting terms for their mandatory policies. And to obtain desirable funding from the US government to pursue outer space activities in the case of satellite launches, guess what? That company has to have insurance to enjoy those government subsidies of their activities. And so it's a way of providing additional governance through the perspective of risk sharing. The insurer defines policies, terms, conditions, and costs, hopefully in a way that minimizes risk and maximizes the reward anticipated from that activity. And there's just one quote showing that yes, space activities are considered ultra hazardous and therefore quite a good locus for insurance as governance for those activities writ large.
So what's a big hazard if you're putting a satellite in space? Is some probability that you're going to have a conjunction event with another satellite or with a piece of orbital debris or with a decommissioned satellite? These are big and increasingly problematic.
That's a lot
issues.
of debris there.
That's a lot of debris represented there. If we look on the graph on the left, we can see that it's increasing, and some of this is represented because of think of the Iridium Cosmos collision in 2009, or anti-satellite missile testing like in 2021, creating more and more orbital debris. You've got satellite operators who, once at the end of the life of the satellite, they just leave it floating around up there. Well, why is that a problem? Because again, this is a scarce resource that's rivalrous in its nature, right? There's only so many orbital slots, and so there's congestion there, and there's an increasing probability that we're going to create more orbital debris through some sort of conjunction event, right? So we need governance, we need some sort of governance and institutions and rules to emerge, and we're seeing them emerge for how to handle these types of activities. So we've talked about the United Nations, and within that there's the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And recently they set up what's called the Long-Term Sustainability Guidelines, which are 21 guidelines that look at how we can take collective action to organize all of our activities, to avoid bad outcomes, to reduce the amount of essentially pollution that we're putting in orbit, and to create norms for kind of sharing information, where our satellites are, what our plans are. And so when we look at these guidelines, they are just simply guidelines, right? They're non-binding, right? But they do represent shared values. And what you do see is you see countries and more local organizations at the national level come up with institutions or come up with rules for implementing these guidelines, right? So, currently you've got, like, say, the FCC that has like end of life mission rules. So that there's like the 25-year rule, which you might be familiar with, which was bringing out of orbit a satellite 25 years after its mission. Now, is that the right rule? I don't know. There's a lot of policy debate about that. Maybe it should come down sooner. But these are the forums that we're seeing norms, kind of like littering, right? Do people not litter because because they think it's the right thing to do, or is it because there's a law in place? Do the norms emerge first and then the laws follow? Do we need either or both? We see this playing out in space. Another issue is orbital slots. This is just geosynchronous orbit, right? We're at 35,000 kilometers from Earth, and that orbit follows the rotation of the Earth, which is really valuable for a lot of communication satellites. So what do we have? What organizations do we have governing that? Well, we have the International Telecommunications Union, which creates rules for deciding who gets those very valuable orbital slots, right? And so it used to be kind of like in mining. It was a first come, first served type of basis. If you staked a claim to an orbital slot or to a mine, right, you were the first one to do it, you get to claim that. Well, more recently, there's been debate here because we're thinking about, remember, Article 1 of the Outer Space Treaty. Well, if this is for mankind, what about emerging space economies or space states that currently don't have the technology to put up their own satellites into orbit, but eventually someday will? Well, if you think of these orbital slots as parking spots, right, who has the right to exclude others from accessing it? And so there's now discussion of like equity issues. Do we want to set aside some for future use? Or some others are going to argue, no, it's valuable today and we can use it today. Let's do that. So there's some of those governance tensions that we see play out, again, nested within that UN organization level.
And so several things you've mentioned suggest that we don't always have the right answer when it comes to governance. You suggested, do we know that it's 25 years that we should decommission a satellite and have it come out of orbit? Should we be using all of these orbital slots today? What is the future value of them that hasn't been realized? And so these tensions may give the impression that or a narrative may give the impression that governance is easy. Governance always works the way it should. That couldn't be further from the truth, because the essence of governance is tackling hard problems about which there is disagreement among actors in a particular social context. And so not only is there disagreement, but in part that disagreement stems from the fact that it isn't certain how to proceed. Nonetheless, we need governance. Its emergence across human history and social contexts means we will have governance in outer space. And so for those pursuing outer space objectives, whether in a private organization, a national government, or an international organization like the UN and the various committees we considered already, governance is inevitable. It's emergent in human activity above a certain scale. And so our definitions, again, is just governance is rule-based ordering of people and natural resources. What are the most important forms that these rules take? Those of institutions, as well as softer rules for human behavior like norms and culture. The institutions themselves emanate from organizations. These organizations can be public, like the national government of the United States, or like the United Nations, or private, such as SpaceX or Blue Origins, or the many nonprofits like the Secure World Foundation that are also engaged in outer space activities, including definition of governance. Finally, the question is, are they profit-maximizing organizations, or are they motivated philanthropically? Because both are playing a role in determining the complex web of governance outcomes seen in our pursuit of outer space activities. Zach, any other final thoughts?
I think that's great, Eric. I'm ready to get to our space conference. Should we summon the captain and see if our security,
see if our defense system.
Our defense system. Yeah. How do I work this? There we go. Very very antiquated technology.
Just finish.
Hi, Captain.
Yeah, we just wrapped up.
Oh man,
you missed everything.
We got it working, but not quite. Your system is working.
Oh, good.
But I missed it all. But I think we were recording it. So.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. Whew. Nice job. I kind of had it on the speakers.
Excellent.
I could hear it, I just couldn't see it. So felt fantastic.
Oh, are we performing right now?
Yeah.
Oh, we are.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So should we test our defense systems?
Yeah. Let me wire it up here. Hold on 1 second. I'll get our simulator up and working for us, and then. So yeah, I think the main issue was that you guys didn't have these controllers. So whoever sold you your system.
So they sold us one without the relevant controls.
We got it on a secondhand market.
Yeah. So yeah, when you're back out on your ship, you should be able to handle all of the defensives that you need. So, oh look at that, you got it all. You know what you're doing. So we just got to hit start.
Good job, Captain.
It's the reason I don't handle the defense. First Officer Donahue tends to be the one who mans the navigational and.
Yeah, and you can obviously call that a comparative advantage.
Wow, so you guys are doing fantastic work. You've got it down. I think, you should be able to, I don't know, port this back to your system. We'll hand you some of our controllers. And so, hold on a second. Hello? Oh, that's not good. Well, I thought I fixed it. I think they're working. Okay, so we're running out of oxygen. Well, shoot, we can't let that happen. All right, I'm going to send them back down to the transporter room. Yeah, okay, thanks, bye. So guys, now we do have a little bit of a worry. We have oxygen depletion. I think we're just not quite set up for the system here.
I'm feeling a little bit lightheaded.
Yeah,
So the air is thin.
We might get you back to your ship. I'm going to go ahead and hand you these controllers. You got a good score there, 2810.
Excellent.
I think you're ready. So you take those. I want to say thanks again for coming to the ship. I'm glad you found us and glad we could help you out. I think it was a great, it was just one of those prodigious moments. And my students my crew that are coming, they're going to enjoy this. So I'll reach out to you. I got your hailing frequency now. So I'll reach out to you in maybe a couple months, and maybe we'll have you come back via, our interconnections, and you can talk to the students and all.
Yeah,
And the crew.
yeah, would love to talk to the students. Yeah.
Yeah.
Consider us a resource, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I look forward to watching your actual lecture too, as well. So, but why don't we head you back down to the transport room? We'll get you back on your ship and make sure you get there all right.
Excellent. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, let me open up the door for you. Yeah, I can feel the environmental systems are kind of failing a little bit. Take your mugs, by the way. They're souvenirs of the ship.
Oh, really? All right. Thank you.
All right. So let me.
Okay.
Looks like you guys are back on the ship and you've got your controllers. How are they working now?
Everything seems in order. I think we're ready to take off to the conference.
Okay, well, thank you so much for recording that. The students are going to love it, and maybe we can see you again someday.
Let's hope for it.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thank you for doing that. I'm so glad that you guys will be in touch, and yeah, thanks a lot. Whew. All right, well, I got to get back to work. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this chair. I don't think I need this chair anymore. Oh, yeah, this is... I don't remember how I got through here.